Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, it's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
It's me, your lovable friend, Jackie.
I thought you were going to pretend you were me, but like, it's me, Rob.
No, I guess I did say that weird.
Comma. No, money down. It is interesting how punctuation is so important for understanding the meaning of things. But this isn't a punctuation podcast. It's not. What's that?
I kind of wish it was.
Was that Grammar Girl?
Yeah, you loved Grammar Girl.
I did for a while.
I mean,
but
she might still be around. I think
she is. She's in the Podcaster Hall of Fame.
Oh wow!
I know. Do you know that everyone has a podcast these days? It was like true in the true in the pandemic when everyone had nothing to do but record themselves. But apparently, like famous people now have podcasts, and then they're like, "Look at my famous podcast." And I don't know about y'all, but I get a little bitter when
I don't.
When like Prince Harry's like, I'm going to make a podcast. It's like, go do whatever you're doing elsewhere, man.
I don't care about it.
Back off.
I don't care about anybody.
This is our beat.
Doing things.
Really?
Yep.
It's very...
That you do them. They will do us. We'll just coexist.
I don't know. I feel like if you are famous and you're in TVs and movies, you should just continue being famous in TVs and movies.
I am famous. Rob.
Not in TVs and movies.
You don't know.
Not on the big screen, not on the silver screen, not on the small screen, on the no screen, which is the podcast.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But while this may be a podcast where we grind gears, it is also a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles. And this week, we decided to do interobserver agreement, parentheses,
that's right.
IOA, a topic so fascinating that I fell asleep before recording while I read my notes.
Oh. Well, we've never talked about it.
Nope.
So we thought we should. And now we're going to.
Will we regret this? Who knows? But we got to fill the schedule.
I won't. I actually really loved my article, and I liked Diana's article. Your article, Rob, was really good, too.
Yes.
All of them were actually great. And
I think that's it. I think we got the 3 articles about IOA that you'll need.
No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't write it, man.
No, it was good. It was very thorough.
Yes, very thorough. And this is, albeit drier than some of our other topics, right, where we talk about, like, the disability rights and justice, right? This one is very practical because...
Well, they're all practical.
Yes, but this one is practical because we should be doing it in clinical work every day, and it is one of the things that I think goes by the wayside. And if we don't have accurate data, then we can't assume that our treatment is going to be effective.
And I'm going to say that I think IOA is one of those things, while it is very important in many ways, that it's similar to when you go up to a parent who's like, hey, the way you're raising your kids, it's bad, and science says don't do it. You better stop. And then we expect like, oh, now they'll do things differently. IOA is one of those things of, hey, I know you've got a million things to do in your place that might not care about IOA, but if you're not taking IOA for 30% of your sessions with every single client you have and getting 80% accurate IOA, you're a bad person. That you sort of are like hand wavy, yeah, whatever, dude, go publish a research article. They don't even do 30%, 80% all the time. So I find I'm somewhat resentful of IOA at times, as it feels like one more thing that everyone wants me to do on top of every other thing.
Sure.
And I kind of appreciated getting a chance to look into what research has to say about IOA.
I like
and
that.
then shockingly finding not a lot. And that made me feel a little bit better about IOA in a way.
This isn't one of the things that keeps you up at night?
What, IOA?
Yeah, things you think about in the shower.
No, I can't imagine. I thought about like, is my behavior plan good? Am I following the ethics code? IOA never showed up in the shower, which is great.
Now, what I'm going to do is before I leave your house today, I'm going to make a little picture of an IOA monster and I'm going to hang it up in your shower.
I'll wave it off. I'll say, I'm not scared of you. You have no power over me. Like, before somebody drops a house on you.
Oh, I think when we talk about, I think we do think about IOA, but we don't call it IOA. Mm-hmm. So I think that we think about things like, is that operational definition that I'm asking my BTs to take data from, is it robust enough, right? Mm-hmm. Because really what you're asking is, have I written a good enough definition that really captures the essence of what I'm trying to take data on, such that more than one person could take reliable data correctly,
yes,
right?
Yes, you totally nailed it, Diana. I think when I think of IOA in terms of practicality, I am thinking about it in exactly those terms. I'm not thinking about how many IOA sessions do I need.
Yeah.
Just, does
How
this
many
person know
IOAs?
what I want them to do, and are they then doing it?
Yeah, because you may or may not have given them the tools
Yep.
needed, but you won't know unless you actually do some IOA.
Yes.
If you have given people the tools. Or you might find out, but this is one way to find out.
That's a bad way to find out. It's like, wow, this data is terrible.
Exactly.
And it's your fault if the data is terrible because you didn't train your staff. I'm not one of those people that's like, my staff are bad at taking data and I've never told them what to do. If you don't train your staff how to take the data you want them to take for the reasons they need, i.e. use IOA at least a little bit, that's on you. So this episode, I think, will be helpful in terms of IOA not being something meant to punish you for how bad you are at your job as a BCBA, but
I'm not saying anybody's bad at their
no
job.
one's saying anyone's bad at anything. But I think IOA tends to be presented as are you doing enough IOA? Like you're not good enough because you don't do enough IOA. Let's think about it. Let's
Gotcha.
reframe our IOA thoughts today.
It's also something that people require, but it's not necessarily paid by insurance companies, so it's really hard to get it in.
Yeah.
So you have to be creative in ways to do IOA.
Yeah.
It's a resource intensive.
It is a one more
ask.
thing. It is a one more thing. But anyway, let's back up the train and just make sure everyone understands what we're talking about when we talk about IOA. So we all have worked with staff who need to take data. We want their data to be accurate, meaning that it's taking data on what is actually happening in front of them and it's real. And we want different people to be able to take data on the same response or target and get the same results. That would be the reliability. And one way that you can do that is through interobserver agreements. Do the two people taking data at different times actually measure the same things? When they take it at the same time, do they measure the same thing? If they took it at different times, would they get the same measure if they were swapping bodies in one of those, what's sliding doors scenarios where,
Freaky Friday.
If they Freaky Friday,
I
would
love
they take the
sliding
same
doors,
data?
though. That's a good movie.
Sliding.
I love Freaky
What
Friday.
boring sliding doors. Like, oh no, I missed the train. Now the other person has to take data today. But luckily the IOA was good, so they take the same data either way. That wouldn't change in either reality.
Yeah,
I wish I could trade place with you just for one day.
I love this. So they got to put when they do a 5th edition Cooper, please use that as the reference to why you want IOA. It should still work in a sliding doors scenario.
That
You
was a
should still
Freaky
get good
Friday
data.
quote I just gave you.
Yeah.
I know you did. Don't
Everyone's just
worry.
ignoring my Freaky Friday
I
content.
don't think
Yeah, we
Freaky
are.
Friday works the same.
doesn't.
Because Freaky Friday.
You know what? I don't know what sliding doors is.
It's a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow from the 90s.
Okay.
I actually know this reference.
Should I bring up Face Off? Or is
No.
that not appropriate?
No,
at this
not
point in time?
appropriate.
Face Off and Freaky Friday, you would not get good IOA because you're talking about two different people who don't have the same training.
Right.
They would take different data. Their data would not be reliable.
But
Okay.
sliding doors is what happens if one
You get
person.
twinned?
No.
I don't know.
I know, I'm telling you.
Stop guessing what it
What
is.
happens when one person makes a decision in their life, like gets on the train or misses the train, and then how their life changes
Oh, okay.
based on that one small decision. But the IOA would be the same, is what we're
Gwyneth
saying.
didn't get on the train and she had a different adventure, so she didn't go to her job as a behavior therapist. The behavior therapist, other behavior therapist, played by who?
Minnie Driver.
Minnie Driver.
I love
Minnie
Minnie
Driver needs
Driver.
to take the data. But luckily, she's trained to take the same reliable data, so she'd still get the same results.
Right.
Okay, great.
So it's a different romance.
The
Someone would end
research
up with Jude Law. Someone wouldn't end up with Jude Law.
is
But the
saved.
data for the client would
be the same. Yes.
Is Jude Law there too?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's a
he's
good
he's
movie. You need
he's
to
the male
watch it.
interest. I don't know if he's in that movie, but he's there somewhere.
Oh, okay.
It's so good.
Yes. So in any case, when we're working with people, just to be prepared for a sliding door scenario, you train your observers to directly observe the client during a behavioral session. Maybe you're taking data on target behavior, it's challenging behavior. Maybe it's on match to sample data, whatever it is, some dependent variable. And when individuals take that data independently for some period, you could then compare the results and calculate an interobserver agreement, which is pretty much how consistently are we taking the same data? Are we actually taking the same data?
On the student response.
On that student response, yes. Usually you're trying to get 80% or greater. And in research, you're usually doing it for at least 30% of the sessions you're reporting on. And if you can hit that value, basically what you're saying is, you know what? If there's a change in the dependent variable, it's because of the intervention. It's not because we're just taking who knows what data at any given time. There are lots of different types of IOA as well. And I think, Diana, you're gonna go through the different types of IOA data for us.
Sure. Do you want me to do that before or after I tell you the episode articles?
After.
Do it after so everyone's on the edge of their seats.
Wait.
Do
which
articles
ones?
first.
Articles first, because that's
okay.
they could have read
You're
that. They could have read
Rob and I
that
are
in the
on the
notes.
same
They can't read
wavelength
this
today.
part.
This is
right?
very weird.
Whoa.
Diana, get out of here.
It's like
Okay.
a Freaky Friday.
Maybe.
Or did we face off? It could have been.
Cosplaying as Diana and have no idea what behavior analysis is.
I actually did not see Face Off.
I didn't either.
He takes his face off.
The
I know it's
end.
Nick Cage and
Okay.
John
That
Travolta.
literally happens in the movie.
Ew,
that,
gross.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. There are 3 articles to talk about today, and they include Interobserver Agreement, a preliminary investigation into how much is enough.
Oh,
by
yeah.
Hausman, Javed, Bednar, Guel, Schaller, Neville, and Kong. And that was in JABA 2022.
I feel that. How much is enough is something I ask myself about almost everything every day.
How much is enough? Also, assessing Interobserver Agreement, IOA, with procedural integrity, evaluation of training methods among classroom instructors by Hartz, Gould, Harper, and Luiselli, and that was published in Child and Family Behavior Therapy in 2020.
I'm not going to lie. When I read that one, I was like, oh my God, the 2 things that people mix up all the time in one article. Uh-oh.
And then finally, effects of a supervisory intervention on assessment of Interobserver Agreement by educational service providers by Garrity, Luiselli, and McCollum, and that was published in Behavioral Interventions 2008.
All right.
Turns out Luiselli loves IOA.
Yeah, right?
He's like, it's my favorite. I'm going to get him a shirt.
All right.
IOA is my jam.
Oh, yeah?
Jamming with my IOA. Total counting.
Wow, that's a deep cut. Well, I used to have a shirt. I don't know where it is anymore, but it had 10 little people, like cut out like paper doll people on the front, and it said 10 out of 10 of us agree, we all agree. So it's like you can all agree, but it doesn't mean that it's the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
It's possible
I
that
should've
shirt
worn
got
that today.
donated by myself for the children when you kept going, hey, everyone, look at my shirt. 10 out of 10 people. We all agree.
Don't worry. For Christmas, I'm going to make you the total counting shirt.
Okay. Fantastic.
I want a shirt with all the IOA types on them, Diana. If I had that shirt, what would be on it?
Okay, I'm going to attempt to tell you. So there are several different ways in which you can calculate IOA. It's not always that you just divide the small number by the big number and multiply by 100. That's the easy way, but it's not always applicable because you could be taking your data in multiple ways, first of all, right? You could be taking frequency data or duration data,
Percentage.
or percentage data. And you could also be taking your data by per opportunity measures or using some type of interval-based recording system. So all of these are going to have varying ways in which you can calculate the IOA depending on the measure that you start with, and then secondly, depending on the stringency with which you would like to calculate IOA, because some measures are going to be a lot less stringent than others. So I'm going to attempt to review these in a way that will make sense to the listener and not get us too bogged down. If it's not working, let me know. All right. First and foremost, we have what's called total count, IOA. And with total count, IOA,
Total counting.
you are going to do the thing I just said that you don't always do. This is the time.
Small number divided by big
Yes.
number times 100.
Exactly. Oh, also, just because we're having this conversation now, there was a period of time in Java in
Yep.
the, I don't know,
90s.
mid-90s.
Mid-90s to late
Yeah.
90s.
through maybe into the 2000s, where, for reasons that are really unknown to
I would
me,
love to know.
It's an
pretty
inside
much
joke that
all of the
turned real.
articles, the IOA said that they did however their IOA calculation was and then multiplied by 100%. But if you multiply by 100%, you are just multiplying by 1 because 100% is 1. So if you were to do that, you would be doing nothing to your number. So it would still be a decimal point, but they were reporting it as percentage. That's not correct. What you do is multiply by 100 in order to change a decimal to a percent.
So throw out every study from the 90s. They're
You
all
don't need
invalid.
to throw it out, but sometimes I think people are using those as models of how to do their own IOA calculations, and then so it kind of gets perpetuated. So you will still sometimes see that 100% floating around, but that's wrong.
So the reason it happened was somebody did it and then everyone said, oh, geez, have I been doing it wrong this whole time? I better change it.
I do not know. I'm not privy to why that happened or why it stopped. So total count IOA is taking the smaller number. Let's say it's frequency, right? So you take the observer who has the smaller number and divide that number by the number that the other observer had. So the larger number goes in the denominator spot. You divide that out, and then you multiply by 100 to get your percentage. Mm-hmm. So if one person said, I counted 4 during this observation, and the other person said, I counted 5, then you would divide 4 by 5, and you would get 0.8, and you would multiply that by 100 to get 80%. That's the easiest one.
Okay.
Okay, next up is and some of these have varying names. I'm just going to give you the name that I usually use. Partial agreement within intervals, IOA. So here we would have our observation broken down into bins of time or intervals. Maybe it's just that it's a 15-minute session, and so we count each 1 minute as an interval. Let's say that. What we would do is we would look at what each observer calculated for every minute of the interval, and we would compare again, if we use frequency, it's easiest. So we compare the frequency of the two scores in each interval and calculate a percent agreement score for that interval. And then we would calculate a mean percent for all of the intervals. So if in interval 1, we had one observer that said, I didn't see anything happen, and the other person said, oh, I counted 1, then you would divide 0 divided by 1, and it would be 0. And then in interval 2, one said, I got 1, and the other person said, well, I got 2. Then it would be 1 divided by 2, which is 50. So you would take 0, 50, and then maybe they got 100% for the rest of the intervals. You would take each of those percent scores, add them up, divide by the total number of intervals, and then that mean would be your overall IOA calculation for that session. Which I didn't do the math on that example that I just provided to you, but that would have been pretty high, even though they had the one interval where it was 0% and one where it was 50. Okay. Next up, we have exact agreement IOA. So here, once again, we have things broken down into intervals. Now, however, rather than calculating a percent for each of the intervals in the session, we're just going to say this is exact agreement that either they agreed or they didn't agree. So if one person said, I saw 1, and the other person said, I saw 2, that's just a big old X. You don't get any credit for that interval at all. Only if everyone agreed, oh, I saw 1, then you can count that interval. So then, were you to do that, you would calculate either agree or disagree for each interval, and then you would add up total number of agreements and divide by the total possible intervals. Also, that's sometimes worded total number of agreements plus disagreements.
I love that.
Divide that out and multiply by 100 to get your calculation there.
So not a great one to use if you're like, let's do an interval of 15 minutes, which is our whole observation. Like, no. I got 22. I got 21. What's 0? 0 IOA.
Yes, exactly. You will lower.
You're being too conservative there.
Score if you do that. So as you could tell, those three I just described are moving from less stringent to more stringent IOA because you're requiring not just overall same number to get a high score of IOA or similar numbers, but actually based on time and then even further based on exact count. Exact agreement. All right, next up is trial by trial IOA. This one is very much like the exact agreement IOA, except in that example, I was talking about intervals of a session, like 1 minute bins of a session. And now I'm talking about trials. So let's say you had a session in which you were presenting 9 trials of some particular task or an SD, right? So now this is a discrete trial format rather than we're doing some type of measurement of free operant responding over a set number of intervals. Here we have 9 trials. And now we're looking to see if the two observers both agreed that the behavior of interest either did or did not occur. If they both said that it did not occur, that counts as an agreement. If they both said it did occur, that counts as an agreement. But if one said it did and one said it didn't, that's a disagreement. So then you're adding up the agreements, dividing by the total number of opportunities for agreement, and dividing that out and multiplying it by 100 to get your trial by trial IOA score. Next up is much like the trial by trial IOA score, except now it is interval by interval IOA. Here it's the same idea, right? Occurrence or non-occurrence rather than, the one I told you about when I told you about exact agreement, that was a frequency measure. So it could have been 0 or 1 or 1 and 1 or 1 and 2 or 2 and 5, right? But they needed to be the same in order to get it counted as an agreement for the interval. Same idea here, except now it's an occurrence or non-occurrence in the interval. So now it's kind of like you would use this for a time sampling measure, basically. So you have a certain number of intervals in the session, and if everyone is in agreement that the behavior occurred, you get counted as an agreement. If everyone agrees the behavior did not occur, it's a disagreement. And I said that wrong. If everyone agreed that the behavior did not occur, it's also an agreement. Only counts as disagreement if one said one and one said the other. You take the total number of agreements, divide it by the total number of opportunities, and multiply that by 100 to get the score. All right, now we're almost done. But I have two special ones to tell you about here. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Like birthday IOA?
Yeah.
Save for the holidays.
These are building upon the interval by interval IOA, which I just discussed. But now we have something a little bit special where up until now, the denominator for all of these IOA measures has always been the total number of trials or intervals in the session, right? Or time bins in the session. For the next two, which are scored interval IOA and unscored interval IOA, now the denominator is going to fluctuate. So we're going to remove some of the sessions entirely, depending on what exactly it is that we are looking to take data on. Okay? So the two observers score all of the intervals. So once again, this is an interval measure type of IOA. Two observers score them all. And for scored IOA, we're only going to count that interval as part of our total IOA score if at least one observer said the behavior occurred. If both of them agreed that the behavior did not occur, we're kicking those intervals out of the equation. This, again, is a more stringent measure. So if it's perhaps a low rate behavior, right? And you had like 15 out of 20 sessions where the person was just hanging out, chilling, didn't do anything, it would be very easy to get a good IOA score because most of the session, everybody's in agreement that nothing is happening at all, right? No occurrence is happening. So this is more stringent because it removes that sort of potential inflation of the IOA score just because it's a low occurrence behavior. So everybody says it didn't occur, you kick those out. Now you're left with a subset of the intervals in which at least one person said the behavior occurred. If one said it did, one said it didn't, that's a disagreement. If both said it did, it's an agreement. And then you divide the agreements by the number of remaining intervals. So not the ones that we kicked out, but all of the remaining ones were one person said it did and one person said it didn't. Those disagreements, we're dividing the agreements by the disagreements and multiplying by 100. And then you may have guessed that the other one I was going to tell you about is unscored interval IOA. So an unscored interval IOA, if everybody agreed the behavior occurred, we are kicking out those intervals. I have a hard time imagining exactly when you would use this one. But I guess if it was just so very obvious, perhaps, then you wouldn't count it? I'm not exactly sure. But if everybody is in agreement that the behavior did occur, you're not going to count those intervals. So again, more stringent measure. If one person said it did and one person said it didn't, it's a disagreement. And if both people said the behavior did not occur, it's an agreement. Then you divide the agreements by the disagreements and multiply by 100.
People said that this one was really helpful if you have a behavior that's having at a relatively high frequency. So then you can take those out because if everyone said...
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So that is what the world says when they would use that one.
Okay, thanks. All right, and then...
Or when you're looking to score the absence of a behavior.
I guess.
Yeah, but those are the two reasons why you'd use this one.
Okay.
Whoever made this one up has really been thoughtful.
Okay. All right. And then you might be wondering, what would I do if I'm not taking frequency data or occurrence data? Because that's what's been going on in all these examples. If that were the case, then you might want to use a duration IOA measure. So you can do total duration IOA, which is add up all of the times in which the behavior was said to occur, like the total duration during the entire session, even if it was in smaller episodes or broken up in cross time intervals. Add it all up and then divide the smaller by the larger and multiply by 100. That's total duration IOA. Other way you can do this is you can do mean duration per occurrence IOA. And so here, let's say you had one person who said, well, that behavior looked to me like it lasted for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. And the other person said, that behavior looked to me like it lasted for 5 minutes. You would divide 4.5 by 5 and get 90, I think. Is that what that would be, right? And then the next time the behavior occurred, one person said that looked like it lasted for 20 seconds. And the other person said that looked like it lasted for 30 seconds.
Or 20 seconds, make it easier for you.
Oh, now, yeah, 20 seconds.
Right.
So then you divide 20 by 20 and get 100. All right. And then you would add up all of those means across the entire session and then create an average of those mean durations for your overall IOA score for that session.
Good work.
Thank you. And then
many ways.
since I'm talking, I'm just going to go ahead and say that each of the things I just described are just for one session of IOA. So then if you are looking to gather IOA data across multiple sessions, you take all of those things that all of the IOA measures, right? Then you create an mean of those, and you also want to report the range as well. So the range is the lowest score to the highest score. And that's usually done in parentheses next to it.
If you're doing research.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And the different IOA types you're going to use, you went through some of them as you were going through, Dinah, but depending
Actually, all of them, almost.
In terms of when you're going to use them, depends on what it is you're trying to measure, how you're measuring it. Is it a high rate or low rate behavior? Those are going to be your determinants of which one of those you want to use.
Yeah, there's a lot of mix and match, pick your own system going on.
I'm going to tell you that anytime I'm going to start using IOA, I pull out my Cooper book. No lie. Pull it out, review, be like, what's going to be the best? Because you don't have to remember all of these. There's, like, you just don't.
No.
So
No, it's kind of a lot.
yeah, pull up your Cooper book, reread the IOA section, skim it, don't, read it. And that's how I choose IOA when I'm going to choose IOA.
Yeah.
Even now.
Honestly, if someone were like, quick, pick an IOA, I'd be like, total, I'm going to do total. Because that one's really
Number
easy.
of agreements.
And I thought of it right now.
Number of agreements plus disagreements.
And the fact that someone was like, I'm just going to randomly make you pick this probably means it's not the most important IOA I've ever been asked to take. So
But there are many different kinds.
Yes.
And you're going to get vastly different IOA scores depending on what you are using.
All right. So now that you know the different types of IOA, or it's a review of what are the different types of IOA, let's take a little break. And when we come back, we'll talk about, how often do I really have to do this stuff? We'll be right back.
Hi. Do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
And we are back talking about IOA. But before we continue our conversation, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening, you're able to earn 1 Learning CE. All you need to do is finish listening to the episode, then click on the link in your podcast player or go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, and you will find a place where you can purchase that CE. You're going to need some key information, though, including 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one right now, and it's Scrooge, SCROOGE.
I bet Scrooge would like IOA with how much money he has.
That would be the worst IOA because he has so much
money.
Or maybe it's
Total
Ebenezer
count.
Scrooge, who is well, no, he's a miser. He also has a lot of money, but it's all in like pounds or whatever, so it's impossible. You can't reliably count pounds because there's all notes or whatever from the Victorian era. Either Scrooge. You don't have to put Uncle or Ebenezer, just put Scrooge. All right, so when we left off, we talked about all the different types of IOA, but when and how often do you really need to take IOA? So we kind of mentioned at the top of the show that usually when you see IOA reported in, say, like a research paper, it is IOA that has 80% accuracy, meaning 80% agreement, averaged across all of the IOA that was collected, and about 30%, if not more, of the sessions that make up the research. And therefore, we all must think, 30% of my sessions need an IOA second observer. And of those, we got to get 80% or higher on average. And there's some sort of science behind those numbers, right? You'd be wrong. There's actually no empirical guidance as to why that is. Some people say 20%. Some people say
nice.
33%. Bailey and Birch in 2018, I'm sure they said this in earlier editions of their book, kind of might have been one of the people to come up with the minimum 30% of sessions, although Cooper et al. Also in their books said something around 30%, but they also mostly focus on like you need better IOA if you're looking at continuous measures of data than if you're looking at discontinuous measures of data. Again, where did the 30% come from? I don't know, probably from one of those books. It sounds like a good number, but it's made up.
It's someone, like one researcher put it in their article one time and everyone's like, oh, that sounds great.
Oh, I mean, originally they put 30, but then someone else put 30 times 100%, and then everyone got confused.
Then it was 300%.
But in any case, those numbers are sort of just it's like a Supreme Court case. It's like case law. It's like someone said it once, and I guess that makes it true. You don't actually need to take IOA at any specific amount because, to be honest, when you think about IOA, if your IOA was always terrible, but you prided yourself on getting IOA for 100% of your sessions, your IOA would still be worthless information because it'd be all over the place. You'd have a range of 0 to 100 with an average of about 50%. Doesn't matter if you're taking a lot of IOA. It's not good IOA. It's not doing its job of assuring some level of reliability. So you need to have reliable IOA. If the IOA session itself is not high, it doesn't matter how often you do it. And technically, if you're thinking, well, if me and my sliding doors partner always get 100% when we do IOA, does it matter if you do IOA in 1% of your sessions or 100% of your sessions until the data change or what the target behaviors are change? Probably not, right? The other limitation to IOA, of course, is that most places, like you said, Jackie, you're not getting paid insurance rates to take IOA data, which means you're doing it for free for the good of, science.
One time there was an agency, I can't remember, it was a few years ago. They had an IOA coordinator, and they hired this one person to just do IOA.
That sounds like the boringest job that ever existed.
They just walked around and just collected IOA and all of the...
Kudos to this place and kudos to that person.
I don't think that job is still in existence.
Wow.
But a few years ago, that was one of the jobs. They're like, oh yeah, they can do other stuff eventually, but we want them to just do IOA
That's
right
like
now.
a white glove level of care you're getting there. Wow.
I don't think that's still around. I have not heard of that job.
No.
Opening.
Most places
it was one agency in Massachusetts that did that.
Most places you're probably looking at not having, having too many clients per person. IOA is probably not even happening at all, or it's happening sporadically, right? So the reality of going in and shaming people about, are you doing 30% of your sessions with IOA? It's probably not going to change for that reason. So the question then is raised, okay, it would be a very different conversation if all the research points to if you don't do 30% of sessions with IOA, then, client data is being misused. It's unethical, right? But there's no support for that. So you could push back and say, I did one IOA. It was 100%. I'm done with IOA for the rest of time. And you're not 100% wrong, but you're also not 100% right. Even in published studies, you see a lot of variabilities, like 41% of sessions, but a range of 3 to 100% across participants, for example. So again, usually you see around 30% in research. That's pretty established. But again, there's no factual reason that any of these numbers exist. So the purpose of this article was to look, this is the Hausman article, Hausman et al. 2022 article, was to kind of answer the question, does it really matter how much IOA we take if the goal of IOA is to ensure a level of reliability of data collection? So here's how they did that, because it would not be ethical to say this person's going to get crummy IOA and this person's going to get good IOA. You're also then comparing potentially, apples to oranges in terms of what are the targets. They're not always going to be the same. So the authors here said, let's just take a bunch of FA data we have from kind of inpatients who were admitted to a unit for the treatment of severe problem behavior between the years 2013 to 2018. Let's just get a bunch of that data that already exists. It's already got IOA data. And let's just futz with the math to get lower percentages of collected IOA. And we'll see, statistically, did it seem to matter in terms of looking at the reliability of the data we collected?
I like that. I like that they didn't try to make people do bad jobs.
Right? Yeah. There's always so much data already lying around.
If your study starts with, some people will get crummy service, stop right there. Nope, cancel. Right. Take it back to the beginning.
The group A will have really horrible service.
Yeah. And not like, oh, there's only so much service to go around. Like, no, we're purposely going to do a bad job. Yeah. No.
There's no need.
So they pretty much picked multi-element FA data like you'd expect until they had 100 sets of data. And the behavior that they were targeted, the one thing they did have, it had to occur at like a moderate or high rate, so above like 0.3 responses per minute.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about, the lower you get in terms of responses, the more you're just going to get crummier IOA because there's so much more non-occurrence.
So I like to imagine that they went into this room and then there was just 100 graphs lying on the floor, and then the one person that was looking at them just sat in the middle.
Sort of like Mindhunter thing?
I don't know what Mindhunter is,
but I didn't finish the show, so I actually don't know if that was a good reference. Maybe it wasn't valid. All right. So how do they do that? Well, you've got your original IOA, which is like, here's the IOA we originally reported on by the clinical team. These clinical teams typically had like 3 people. They had a primary therapist, and then they had 2 backup people who would sort of take turns being the primary data collector and the reliability data collector. And they used a data collection system. So everyone could use the data collection system. And they pretty much did an initial training where everyone had to get an IOA score of 90% or more kind of reliability before they were allowed to sort of take the data that would be included in the study. So we're looking at people who should be taking reliable data for each participant.
Yeah.
So that is as much as you can take out of the equation. That's taken out of the equation. So you'd have your original IOA. And then they just recalculated, what if we got rid of some of the data using a random number generator? So let's say we had 100 data sets for this participant. That's a long FA, but let's say 100 sessions to get this data in the FA. Let's randomly throw out 70 of them to get 30% IOA. Then let's randomly throw out, and on and on. So they pretty much would do that.
30% of sessions.
30% of sessions,
IOA.
Yes. That took with IOA, let's throw those out. So you, instead of having whatever the original percent was, which kind of ranged a bit, but it was usually more like higher, like 50, 60, about 60% was their average normally. Let's throw out some of that data till we get 30% of the sessions, 25% of sessions, 15% of sessions, and even down to 10% of the sessions. And again, they used a random number generator to sort of determine which of the data gets tossed per, calculation. And then they'd recalculate IOA when they only had the 10% of the sessions, or 15 or 20 or 30 or 25.
Makes sense.
Yep. So pretty straightforward. And again, they messed with the math a little because you couldn't always get exactly 30% or 25% because these FAs had different numbers of sessions, right? Or they'd take in different amounts of IOA. And then they would look and calculate using all of the tools Diana talked about. Exact, partial, total, occurrence, and non-occurrence agreement data. Looking
all
at
of them?
And again, it was intervals.
Good thing everyone was already primed by my explanation.
I don't have to talk about it anymore. And they just did that for the original IOA, and they did it for each of the programmed percentages. So they pretty much take whatever data was left, or data were left, and go through all the calculations. Then they ran stats to say, okay, did any of this matter? Is there a statistical significance between any of these? Like 10%, oh, that's garbage compared to our original one, therefore 10% is too low, or maybe it's about the same.
It's always the moment in your research where you're like, did any of this matter?
That's great. You're like,
I mean, pro tip, if you're like, I don't have a lot of time to read this article and you see they're using statistics, go to the results paragraph. If it's really, really short, they didn't find anything significant.
Look if there's a lot of little asterisks in the table.
Yeah.
right?
If they keep running more and more statistics, they didn't find anything of value. It just happened.
Luckily in our field, we usually are tackling socially significant
Yeah.
problems. So this is hardly ever a question.
So, like I said, original data, they took IOA at about 60% of sessions, and they generally got high agreement. They got agreement in like 95.82%. I'm not going to go through every single type of IOA they did because it's just a bunch of numbers.
Yeah.
It's all pretty high.
Please don't.
Total is the lowest, though. So total IOA was 76%.
That would make sense because it's the least conservative.
Yeah. Oh, no, sorry. Excuse me. Occurrence. I meant occurrence.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Total was high, 98%. The highest. Occurrence was low, 76%. So exact occurrence. My bad. That's my bad. So
That's
it
the
was
most
occurrence.
conservative.
It's the most conservative.
Yeah.
Okay.
And non-occurrence was actually pretty good. But again, usually nothing happened. People are pretty good at understanding that. And they would just sort of go through and they do all of those calculations for all of them. And I'll save you some time for the 30 to 10% cutoffs that they kind of created by losing, quote unquote, losing some of the data. They really didn't see a lot of variation when they looked at exact agreement. It got a little bit wider ranges from session to session. So the lowest and the highest session, kind of that stretch changed for the 15 and 10% cutoffs, which makes sense because you're looking at, lower numbers, meaning it's only going to take one crappy session of IOA to, change your range more significantly. But they really didn't see any huge changes. So overall, the average rates looking at exact agreement wasn't too bad, even when only 10% of the sessions had IOA collected. You saw pretty similar results with partial interval agreements at those same cutoffs, pretty similar results with total agreements. It started getting a little less similar for non-occurrence and occurrence, but those actually were always below the 80% acceptability rate, like across the board. So none of them really, it wasn't like, oh, well, this one was worse or better. They all weren't that good.
Yeah.
So occurrence and non-occurrence, that's more an issue of using, I think, occurrence and non-occurrence as IOA. They're very, very conservative.
Yes.
But basically, it came down to there wasn't much of a significant difference between whether or not, if you started, at least with FA data, if you started with a high degree of reliability, so like one good IOA session, it really didn't matter how much IOA you then subsequently collected. You got pretty good reliability results overall. Like IOA did its job. Like the results didn't change.
That makes sense.
Yeah. They also noticed that there was a negative correlation between the response rate across all the cutoffs. So again, you'd get better IOA when the response rate was not higher. So the higher the response rate, the chromier the IOA tended to get, which is kind
more
of a makes
opportunities
sense
for disagreements.
result. Yeah. So that response rate significantly predicts how variable your IOA is going to be, except for occurrence agreement. Actually, it didn't seem to matter too much.
Too hard.
But it didn't matter
hard.
which type of IOA cutoff you used. So at least in this specific situation, and at least with this kind of sort of made up data, I mean, it's real data, real IOA data, but it's a little fakey how they had to make it, but that's okay for what they're trying to do. But, the amount of IOA doesn't matter if you train pretty well your staff to begin. So the key seems to be train reliable data collection with your other observers. And therefore, you might not need as many sessions. Again, you might want more if you're doing, say, like occurrence data. You probably want to do more IOA sessions because you're expecting to see a little bit less reliability there. That's a harder, just calculation-wise. So it's probably more important that you train your staff well to start than you have to do this much IOA. Again, we're not sure if that's exactly the case.
I love this
but
takeaway.
Hey, there we go. And again, if you're noticing patterns like, hey, our IOA is all over the place, you might need to retrain, or you might just need to do more IOA sessions. But there's no magic reason of more is always better for IOA. Train well to start, and you might not need as much IOA. So therefore, you could do better IOA because now you don't need to do 30%, which I think for a lot of people, it's, I can't do 30%, so I'll do 0%.
Right, yeah.
No, that's not the takeaway there.
You say, all right, IOA is great, and so we're only going to collect X amount per Houseman et al. 2022.
Do good IOA, and then you don't have to do it as much,
Yeah.
potentially.
This is actually really good. This
is good.
This could be a big time saver for people who are stressed about what you're describing, that they don't have time to take all of this IOA data, because it is very resource intensive to suggest that people
The journey of 1 million IOA sessions
do
begins
this.
with a single IOA session.
I will say, though, that, IOA is usually being collected in the context of doing other types of observation for your staff.
Yes.
So that should be happening regardless. There is a certain percentage requirement, like 5% of RBT's time, I believe, is supposed to be supervised, right? So good supervisors should be in there doing this anyway, but make sure IOA is being collected.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to tell you about Garrity et al.
Can't wait.
And it's going to be short and sweet because this article, what they were looking at was the dependent variable they were looking at, there we go, was IOA data collection.
Okay.
Right? But this is really like an OBM article because they're just talking about like how can we make sure people collect IOA data.
Step one,
on the floor.
don't make them feel bad. They're probably not taking as much IOA data as they assumed they needed
They weren't even worried about that, Rob, because their goal in this study was once a month.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, if they trained well to begin with, once a month might actually be okay.
Yes. So this was a systems level approach where they want at the supervisory level, they said, we want to make sure people are collecting IOA. How can we make this happen across the school? So it was a school for, students with disabilities. And what they did was they taught the teachers who ran each of the classrooms. There were 8 classrooms. Taught is a loose term in this case. They already had a system in place for collecting IOA data in which the teachers are supposed to do that by observing with the support staff, and then, or 2 support staff could do it together as well, and then everyone put their data into a spreadsheet, and then the classroom teacher, the one who was like the actual participant in the study, was supposed to summarize those data eventually. And that was, the dependent measure was already in place, and because it was already in place, it allowed them to take background baseline data basically before they did the intervention, which is always kind of nice and is actually the way to do it if you're trying not to be intrusive initially, right? And so they had 2 things that they were supposed to take IOA data on. What they call the SAP, which was some aspect of the skill acquisition plan, and BSP.
You mean the maple syrup?
Yeah, I know. Yes, the SAP, and the BISP, which was the behavior support plan. And they wanted them to get IOA for each student 1 time per month. That was the goal here. So it was potentially could be viewed as a meetable goal. Okay. And they arranged this as a multiple baseline across the 2 different types of IOA. So I guess, is that stimuli? I was trying to sort it out for myself. I guess it's across settings, right?
Yeah.
They did the BSP first and then the SAP after that. So the baseline was that whole period of time where just the existing IOA system was in place. And then the intervention was a treatment package that included 3 components. Action directives, where the supervisors met with the classroom teachers and said, hey, we are doing a performance improvement project to look at IOA for BSPs first. And then when it was time to do SAPs, they had another meeting and said SAPs. Then they added, this was all happening at the same time, action directives, and then a public posting where there was an IOA checklist that was placed on the wall. And all it was they said, hey, when you take IOA, write it down on here. That's it.
People still hate that, though. Everybody hates public posting.
They talked about it in limitations, but they were at work. This was part of their job, right on the wall when you do it.
I agree.
Right? Yeah. And then the third part was performance feedback. So here the supervisors checked into the classroom each week and gave either verbal praise or corrective feedback based on whether the checklist was filled out on the wall.
There you go.
They
That's
either
actually
said,
pretty easy.
great job doing your IOA, or don't forget, you need to do your IOA. And that was basically it. They also gave teachers, the classroom teachers, a bar graph that looked at their percent scores as compared to other classrooms.
I love the comparison.
Yeah. And that was it. That was the intervention. The baseline scores for both BSPs and ASPs were low, 18% for BSPs, 31% for ASPs. When they implemented this treatment package, it increased to near 100% levels, although it didn't happen immediately. So I'd like to point that out. For BSPs, it did pop up pretty quickly. After a couple of months, it reached 80%, which was their criterion. For the ASPs, it took several months. It took 5 or 6 months for them to see this increase. So it was not immediate. It was a little bit more gradual. The graph is a beautiful graph.
Except
I know. It looks like a graph when our students make hypothetical data. It looks like a hypothetical data graph.
This is what it should look like.
Except that there is an increasing trend in baseline for the behavior support plan. It still only goes up to 30%. So
They're like, we need to. It's been 3 months.
Oh, gee, yeah, when you're going by months, like, we can't live here anymore.
Yes. And
Why did you have a good month?
it was beautiful, other than that one little hiccup there. Beautiful graph. It was a treatment package, so that was in the limitations here. They don't know if it was the action directive, the public posting, or the feedback that was the necessary or sufficient component to produce behavior change. And as I was reading the study, I was like, whoa. I mean, they increased the IOA data collection, but what was the IOA actual agreement? We don't even know. They didn't even tell us, right? And I'm like already typing it in the limitations, and then when I get to that part of in the study, they go, actually, we didn't even bother looking at the agreement because it was 89% in baseline, and it stayed 89% throughout the whole study. So the IOA...
They don't need that much IOA,
Exactly.
Diana, because it was good when they started.
Right. So it was good when they started, but they still wanted to get it once a month. Right? That's all they were asking.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Now, I'd love to see the study again and the IOA was garbage
Yes,
in
that would
baseline.
be an
you'd have to look at
important,
both.
different study to look at.
Yeah.
But that's how they tackled this. They were able to get it up and running.
You were huffing and puffing.
Ooh, then
Yeah.
could you add in a piece of like, hey, if your IOA is above 80% agreement, then you only have to do it once a month. And if it's not, we do a couple more IOA sessions. Would that add
punitive.
into, fine, well, I'll do better IOA, or I'll
Well, that's what's supposed to
do some
happen
prep.
if your IOA is low.
Yeah, it should happen.
Yeah.
But like, it really will happen
Right.
because
So
we're
that
doing a study.
they didn't need to do that here, but that could be an important extension.
Yeah.
And that's how they did it.
Cool.
I love that.
All right, let's bring it home with Hearts and Friends.
So this might have happened at the same place, potentially. But
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't actually
well, this
think so.
no, maybe not. But this study doesn't actually look at taking IOA. It doesn't look at IOA at all in the way that you are looking at IOA. It's looking at how people actually take IOA and if they're
Okay.
doing it correctly using procedural
Dun, dun, dun.
integrity. They're looking at the procedural integrity of IOA, which is funny
Right.
because those two
Yeah.
terms are very difficult for students to differentiate. And so IOA is that student response, and procedural integrity is looking at whether the researcher or the clinician is doing what they should be doing in that moment, right? And
So their IOA could have been terrible, but are they taking it correctly?
Right.
Theoretically.
right. So that's what they're looking at. And the funny thing here, I love, is there must have been, when they submitted this to the journal, people must have been confused because I can't tell you how many times they're like, and remember, we're not looking at IOA, we're looking at the procedural integrity of IOA so many times.
Did you ever see Mr. Show?
No.
There's a class. A lot of people say it's one of their best shows, but they do. It's the comedian David Cross, where they have a show called the Pre-Taped Call-In Show. So the topic he's talking about on the show that is airing actually was recorded the week before. So people keep calling in and they're like, "Yeah, I want to talk about this," but you keep talking. No, that was last week's show. This week we're talking about the deficit. Last week we were talking. So that kind of has that same feel of like, no, it's not. It's procedural integrity.
So they, again, even in the purpose, or like in the present study, we extended the IOA assessment training literature by evaluating methods for improving procedural integrity of classroom data, not by increasing IOA scores or the frequency of IOA. So there were 6 participants in this study, 3 female, 3 males. They were all in their 20s. They were in a classroom at a residential school for kids with developmental disabilities and autism. It doesn't say anything about informed consent. And I just wonder, because it seems like these people work in these classrooms. It seems what it reads to me as this was like a project that they did to see if people were running IOA correctly, and then they were publishing it. So I just didn't see informed consent in there. So I'm just
Sometimes places have like blanket
Yeah.
for training.
And I feel like being like super specific about we got informed consent and here's how. That's been like the past 2
no,
years.
I know.
I've seen it a lot better.
I know, but I was just like, because it's all the people, it's all the classroom aides or instructors that work in a classroom, because there's 2 classrooms, 3 instructors per classroom with 1 big classroom teacher. They're not big, but right, they're supervisor. And so, and it was also selected due to convenience across these 2 classrooms. They had no exclusion or inclusion criteria.
They were really
They're like,
close to the researcher's offices.
Right, they're going to do classroom 1 and classroom 2. The students in these classrooms were 13 to 7 years old. They had a diagnosis that put them in this school, and the school hours were between 8:30 to 3, and they worked on all the things that you would imagine, things on their IEPs, their behavior support plans, etc. So the dependent variable, again, they talk about it multiple times. It's not looking at IOA scores.
It was the percentage of IOA, right, Jackie?
Yeah, it's the percentage of steps the participants implemented correctly, integrity percentage that they put on the 9-step IOA procedural integrity checklist. So they gave you a nice little table. So I'm not going to give you all 9 steps because you don't need to know that, but I'll give you a few. Like step 4, participant, primary data recorder, vocally cue second data recorder to initiate IOA assessment. That's
you have
one.
to tell you take IOA data on me.
Step 8, participant, primary research, conducts IOA assessment until academic sessions conclude. So that's what they're looking at. I don't need to read them all. I picked 4 is because that's the one that people made the most errors on.
Yeah. That also seems the one that I would be the least likely to ever actually say.
It's like 100%
It's like, are you here to do IOA or not? If you are, why do I need to ask you to do it?
So this will be surprising. The rule at this school was IOA was supposed to be conducted at least once a week for each instructional program for each student.
Wow.
So that was 10 programs for each student, so approximately 50 to 60 assessments each week.
That
is a lot.
That's a lot.
So it occurred 1 to 3 times per week and was not contrived. So it's just naturally occurring when they would do these assessments. They didn't ask them.
But that's like a nightmare because every day it's like somebody's birthday and the program you expected to see didn't have. Maybe they didn't have birthday parties.
They did say that, though. They did say that sometimes they would go in and the students would be outside of the classroom, and so then they would have to do something else.
That's so stressful.
And they said that there was, since it was naturally occurring, they probably saw reduced reactivity because the supervisor was always in the classroom for many tasks.
Well, they couldn't leave. They had to take all those IOA sessions.
They're like, I sleep
Where would they
here.
have gone?
I'm sleeping here. So all the participants served as both primary or secondary IOA observers depending on their availability, who they were working with, the sessions that they were doing. So again, they say, however, the agreement between participants recording trials and steps was not calculated. Rather, we're looking at the IOA procedural integrity checklist, right? They're looking at whether the participant designated as the primary implemented each of the 9 steps correctly or incorrectly. So that is what they care about. They also looked at the reliability of the PI scores. That was good, so at 92%. The experimental design was cool. It was really fun. They had a concurrent multiple baseline design across classrooms with each participant in each classroom depicted on the graph.
Okay.
So I like that. It's a neat little thing to do. So in baseline, this is what's already happening at this school. So all the participants received orientation training. They had training activities for all the staff. They have a self-paced training module on data collection and the importance of IOA. They received written instructions on procedures for collecting, assessing, and calculating IOA. They also had performance expectations about saying, hey, I want you to do this IOA every week. So that's what they got, right? And following orientation, they had the coaching with the teacher, and that occurred informally for 4 weeks. And this basically was reminders and verbal instructions to do IOA, but did not include rehearsal. And also during a weekly classroom meeting, they talked informally about IOA each time. Okay. So during the interventions, everything about baseline remained the same, right? Because you can't take the skills that they learned during orientation away. But intervention 1, they just sent out a memo, which I love.
And we all know how important memos are.
So the classroom teacher handed the participants a memo saying, hey, do you remember the importance of IOA? Here's how you do it. Here's a little more information. And then the teacher's like, did you read the memo? Did you understand the memo? That's intervention 1. As you can imagine, that did not work.
No?
Nope. It was similar levels to baseline.
I do love how sometimes their performance was actually
Decreased.
worse. With
Yeah, it actually got worse after the memo.
I'll show you. This is what I think of your memo.
I'm going to pee on your memo. Just kidding. And intervention 2, surprise, surprise, BST, right? So they conducted a single and separate BST sessions with each group for around 60 minutes. The first half was held outside of the classroom in the group with the trainer, and they worked with each other to do IOA. And then the second half was held inside the classroom, and this was considered master if they had 80% on the checklist. So the results were surprisingly what we would think, is that actually everyone had kind of high scores of IOA in baseline, and I'm surprised that they kept them because the mastery criteria was 80%, and overall
Like three of them,
right.
yeah, three of them were either way above or like right at 80%.
I mean, some of them are variable, but they all hit 80% at some point in baseline, except for one participant. His name is Lenny. Lenny never scored above 50% in baseline. He's in classroom 2. Poor Lenny. We also don't know how long he's worked there.
Yeah.
But in intervention 1, basically you either saw behavior stable or decreased. Everybody hated the
Duncan
memo.
had great IOA in baseline, and then once they told him to do it,
He was like, no thanks.
he's like, maybe I'll quit instead.
Duncan hates authority, man.
Duncan quiet quitted. And then intervention 2 following BST, everybody
Maybe he was
everyone
going
increased.
through something.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe he got Freaky Friday.
I mean, that's how I respond when people tell me.
Duncan sliding doored.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing they did is they looked at...
Condescendingly telling me, did you read that memo?
Did you read the memo? They looked at... I love that they gave us a table to a nice little bar graph of integrity percentage for all the participants, and you can see that the black bars represent intervention 2, and they're all high.
Yeah. That is helpful because the graph has
It's
a
a hot
lot
mess.
of
Oh, it's
overlapping
very
data
busy.
points. Yeah.
So they also looked at error analysis and noticed that there was consistent errors on specific steps, such as step 4, like I said.
I feel like that's a pattern. Anytime there's a procedural integrity checklist where one of the steps is, and then tell somebody to do procedural integrity,
Well,
that's always the step no one can do.
I will say it is important if you're doing interval recording. You have to start
Yeah,
at the exact same time
And, yes.
in order for the intervals to be correct. So if that were the case, then it's actually very necessary.
It's not really clear from the
3,
checklist
2,
they have.
1, now.
It just seems like they're like, we're doing this now, which I don't know if it was to
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
to that
just
level.
saying.
So, yeah, so they said, we're going to have to use BST. We just can't tell people, we can't give them a memo if they're going to do IOA correctly. We
In
have
fact,
to train
don't
them.
give them a memo.
Don't give them a memo. And I mean, the limitations were limitations that you put in a research article, right? That they had high levels in baseline already, right? They didn't have stability in responding before moving to intervention 1 and then moving to intervention 2, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's fine.
And it's a classroom-wide
Yes,
Right.
this is
intervention, so you have a little bit less wiggle room in terms of
But yeah.
when you intervene.
Right. And main point is just that you need to teach people how to run IOA.
That makes sense.
Yep. Using BST, not just telling them.
Yeah.
All right.
Now we should do one on procedural integrity for calculating IOA.
Ooh.
Ooh, not
'Cause that
today.
is a hot mess.
It
But it
is,
also
yeah.
doesn't matter how good the IOA is because we only care about whether they went through the steps that would be required to complete IOA. The IOA bad, but the steps to follow it good.
I'm going to say that this was the first study that looked at procedural integrity of IOA. So there you go.
But
You
how was
just-
the IOA? Did they measure the IOA?
It doesn't matter. You need to start somewhere. All right.
All right.
Baby steps.
Well, I don't know where we are. Are we in dissemination
We
station?
are.
Yeah.
Do you think Observer 2, do you think we're in dissemination station?
Yes, we all agree.
Observer
Here
3,
we are.
do you agree?
What? 3-person IOA. We've not
It's
covered that.
100% IOA. We're
20
in dissemination
20-person IOA.
10 out of 10 people agree. We all agree.
Wow. Where's that shirt again? As much as
Total counting.
Someone took it away.
I think I was teasing the topic. I do like it. Feels like we kind of hit on all the
Yeah.
quadrants since I don't know if we did 4 but of IOA. Well, we talked about what IOA is, how much IOA you may or may not need. We talked about how to train people to do IOA, and we talked about the other thing.
How to train people to do IOA better.
How to train IOA better. So there we go. We covered it all. Anyone want to do, who thinks they can sum that up? And then the rest of us will do IOA on their response.
I think that's what you did.
I didn't actually say, that's what we looked at.
Oh, so I think the sum is if you do good IOA, you don't have to do as much of it. If you train people on how to do IOA, you probably don't have to do as much of it. And yours was...
If you need to know what IOA is, get your Cooper book. You don't
Get
need
your
to have
Cooper book. You don't
memorized
need
it,
to memorize it.
before you get there.
Yeah.
And it's important to know what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, my study was, this is how you can get people to take IOA.
Take IOA.
Yes.
Right. Don't do public posting.
But you might need to look at something like your study to make sure they're taking it correctly.
Right. Oh, I love it.
All
Good
right.
job, everyone.
Yeah. And again, like we've already said, we recognize that this can be something that's challenging to fit into your day.
Yes.
But it is important given that the way in which we measure our primary dependent variable is through visual observation and recording. There is honestly a lot of room for subjectivity, human error, observer drift. All of these factors we can end up with data that are not actually representative. So capturing at least some portion of IOA can help us feel better that the data that are being collected are reliable. And those data are the way in which we make clinical decisions, right? Like we graph those suckers and then we say this is working or it's not working. We need to make a change or this is good. And so this is actually, it's really important.
It is
right?
important.
It is
Yeah.
really important when we get down to it, even though it feels like a drag. It's something that we should do. And we've just reviewed a lot of ways to try to streamline that process.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I don't think this is a topic that will never have more research, but it does feel like a somewhat under-researched topic. So, hey, we talked about a couple ideas you could try if people aren't already doing that. So maybe we'll see more IOA in the future, but maybe that's it. That's all you need to know about IOA from now. Now just use it. And with that, let's move into the last section of the show, pairings.
All right. For pairings today, I like to tell you about other episodes you could check out if you found this one enjoyable. So we have talked about 2 other pieces thus far in our catalog that kind of make up this trifecta of additional measures that we very often see included in our clinical or our research work. And so that trifecta is IOA, procedural integrity, and social validity. IOA is the only one we hadn't talked about until this point in time. We talked about social validity
did it. We can
2
quit now.
different times. That's right. In episode 90 and episode 270. And we just very recently talked about procedural integrity in episode 301, which is actually the reason why we then realized, oh, we haven't actually talked about IOA.
But
we
what
should
was
do
the
that too.
IOA in that episode? I don't remember now.
No, stop it.
It was probably high.
And then I was like, oh, I don't even know what else to include. So I threw in episode 111 where we talked about visual inspection of data because it's another one where you're like, check out your Cooper book if you want to know more. So it kind of fits in with that sort of same line. And then for a snack for today, I will pull back the curtain here and let you know that my youngest child and Jackie's child are upstairs unsupervised.
My youngest too. My youngest and
A year old,
oldest.
yeah. And so to try to keep them occupied, I gave them a little recipe to follow. So they've been cooking in the kitchen, making, what did I call it?
Sandy something.
desert parfaits, which involved graham crackers, bananas, and vanilla pudding, and some little animal cracker guys to go on the top. So if there's any left, we'll get to go up
They
and
were
try them.
very excited when I went up to
Very
yell at
cute
them
working together on it.
because they were pretending they were cats along the ground playing jacks. And when they were upstairs
they're playing
playing jacks, I was like, "How old are you guys? Are you from the 50s?" Because they came up and like, "Look, we're playing jacks."
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So,
they love it. I love
anyway.
it. Yeah.
But
So
what
that's
was their
our snack.
IOA on their snack?
I
Or
think
is
it was
procedural
100%.
integrity? You've blown my mind.
I mean,
It
on the
looked pretty good.
deliciousness of the snack, I believe
100%.
I hope they both rated it 100%, and therefore their IOA would also be 100%.
And their occurrence and non-occurrence data
Yeah.
on how tasty it was?
Exactly.
My kid
Yep.
said that she was crawling around the floor so that I would come up and yell at her so that she could get permission to eat it.
No. That's too funny. All right, and that's pairings. Please enjoy.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. If you like the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe. You can leave us a good or bad review, whatever you think is fair, but just make sure you subscribe. You can
I like
also,
it when people say, "Go, it's 5-star review," so that's what I'm going to say.
I mean, it'd be nice if you did, but I want you to be ethical and think about how you felt about the show. But maybe listen to multiple episodes because you need good procedural integrity. Or is it IOA? Who knows? Social validity? Anyway, you need to...
Confusing everyone.
I'm sorry, everybody. All right.
Okay, keep going.
We go to our website. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all the articles we discussed today, as well as to purchase CEs. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track shenanigans, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe at the $3, $5, $10, or even more levels. But the $5 and the $10 levels is where you get special episodes and bonuses for CE purchases, as well as free CEs at the $5 level. You're able to vote on our quarterly listener choice episodes and get a free CE for those. And at the $10 level, you're able to choose not only our quarterly book club episodes, which are 2-hour discussions of a book related to behavior analysis, but also get free CEs for listening. And at the time of this recording, you may still have a little bit of time to vote in our poll, which goes for the whole year of books. So if you haven't joined already, check us out at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And finally, I have a couple big thank yous. But before I do that, I want to give you the last secret code word which is oats. OATS. I gotta be honest, I don't know why this is one of our code words. Usually there's a
You
funny
wrote
story.
it.
I apparently wrote it. Was I looking at a thing of oatmeal and said oats? That's the
Probably.
word.
They were not in the sandy desert parfait.
No, you can't have oats there. But it's not oatmeal. It's just oats. OATS.
I've been eating overnight oats like every morning.
Have you been?
Yeah.
I thought you just made a bowl of oatmeal.
No, now I moved on.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know it was overnight oatmeal.
Cold oatmeal is the way to go.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a summertime snack. And finally, big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro, outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.